This is the Minding Your Own Business podcast, brought to you by Elder Research. Each episode will bring in data and analytics gurus from around the world as they regale us with their data analytics stories and enlighten us with their secrets for how to turn data into actionable insights. Now, here's our host, Evan Wimpy, who will guide us as we dare to mind our own business.
Hello and welcome to the Minding Your Own Business podcast. I'm your host, Evan Wimpy, and today I'm super excited to introduce our guest, who is Sarah Kalicin. Sarah is an HR data scientist at Intel. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you, Evan, for having me.
All right, Sarah, to get started just a little bit, can you give us just a little bit about your background and how you got to your role where you're in today?
Oh, my background. I have a very diverse background. So I am actually an industrial statistician by training. I have a master's degree from the University of Michigan. And with that, I've worked in many different organizations and industries and so forth. So, just kind of, some of the industries are kind of automotive. I worked at Ford Motor Company, Nabisco Craft Foods, so packaged goods and so forth, medical devices at BD, and then here at Intel, I've been at Intel for about 17 years, where I've worked in manufacturing, sales and marketing, R&D, and now I am working in HR. And one of the things I love about kind of my diverse background is really about being able to just have a business problem, understand that business problem, and then be able to translate that to a data problem so that we can figure out kind of what the value is for the company. Everything from when I was at Nabisco Craft Foods, some of my favorite things to do was, we would have like, hey, here's a new sweetener that's 5 cents per pound cheaper than what we were currently having. And we would need to go and figure out kind of how do we reformulate that. So doing designs of experiments and so forth, and trying to figure out kind of what the right combination of ingredients is so that you would maintain the texture or the consumer liking of that product. Medical device companies going in and trying to figure out kind of how do you make like a syringe less painful if you're taking blood and so forth like that. So more designs of experiments, or going into manufacturing and trying to figure out how to remove waste from the manufacturing. Like, hey, these cookies are a little bit bigger on this side versus that side. Being able to go in and being able to tell that to the factory on that. And being able to, give something actionable that they could go back and fix and see immediate feedback. And then here with my current position in HR, a lot of what I'm doing is just really taking something that just seems really ordained, like kind of learning, and trying to identify kind of how we can get business impact. And we can talk a little bit more about that and some of the other questions, but I hopefully from this example you could see that my background is pretty diverse, and this is something that I really love doing, and being able to help companies really be able to gain much more value than they would from kind of just basic numbers, but really being able to translate that to a business value and being able to show them how that pathway of how to gain that value from it. So really being able to think outside the box and bringing an organization along. So that's some of my passions about what I've done from my background. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, Sarah, that's great. And I think that's sort of a common theme that we sort of like to highlight on the show. We try to get at that. It's maybe there is some avenue, there is some specific use case in some specific industry that is your avenue for this, but really when you zoom out, it is exactly what you just described. It's finding some challenge or some problem, and yet maybe data and statistics and analytics is the means, but you're really just focusing on a business problem and how folks can try to make better decisions or how folks can try to do better with them. And
Yeah.
you've touched a lot of spaces, which is very cool. My I often tout that as the one of the perks or benefits of being in consulting is you get to try a lot of things. But I think that you've absolutely gotten to touch a lot of very cool things, and I want to talk about a lot of them. But I do want to spend some time on the HR part, your current role, because we've interviewed a lot of guests here. We've talked to marketing folks, to operations, supply chain folks. I don't think we've talked to anybody specifically in HR. So can you give us just a little bit of flavor of what an HR data scientist does? And maybe if you want to, or if you're able to paint an example of a project that you've worked on.
Yeah. So, I mean, I work at Intel, so we have a lot of data scientists within our HR department that kind of deal with different domains within HR. So, because we're dealing with people and so forth, there's a lot of different things that we can be able to measure. But in my domain, I am responsible for the learning and development aspects of Intel, and I'm responsible for that data and being able to translate that into some kind of business impact. And to give you an idea of something that we're doing is, and this isn't, this is something that's kind of public, is Intel's been struggling for the last few years on execution. We've missed a lot of our deadlines and so forth, and losing our competitive advantage. So, there's a big push for being able to execute much more efficiently. So, part of that is training, really getting training out to our employees and really understanding, what does it mean to execute as an enterprise or even within an organization. So we've been putting together a lot of cultural transformational training, and my responsibility is really just to go out and try to figure out, how do we know that we've moved the needle on our organization? Did our training really help, push the company forward towards being able to execute? So, as you probably know, the easy things to do are to measure kind of what is called in a Patrick model, the level 1, which is like the reaction. But just because you took a class doesn't necessarily, and then you like the class, doesn't necessarily mean it translates into skills or behaviors or business impact. And the further you go down that line of skills, does that translate into behaviors and business? It becomes much, much harder to quantify. And I know a lot of organizations are struggling with that. So, my job is really trying to figure out, how do we do that? How do we break that down? What kind of measurements do we need to do in order to be able to showcase that, these classes are having impact and that folks are gaining the right skills and then getting those behaviors, so that as a collective, we can move the company forward. So that's kind of my role. It's really exciting to be able to really have that challenge. And as soon as you get up to business impact, how do you know that how much of that is really from the training versus, so being able to break that apart is kind of like the thing that I'm trying to figure out now.
Yeah, that sounds like a super challenging problem. I would imagine it's very noisy data, the business impact, as whatever multitudes of factors that are going into it, and where training comes in, along with the time lag of training before you see business impact. Well, you mentioned in your background, some of the things you've done at previous roles has been able to do design of experiments. Is that something that you can do here, where some folks can get some training, some get other? Is it okay to not train some folks?
Well, I mean, some of this, yeah, having a control and so forth would be nice and so forth, but we can do, that's the beauty of having a really, like a Fortune 50 company, is it's really big, and we can do some experimentation or causal analysis and so forth to be able to look at that. And that's some of the things that, we're kind of, looking at how do we tease out some of that noise, and to be able to showcase kind of the impact. So yeah.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, and you're right. The data scientists certainly always clamoring for more data, more data. And I would imagine HR is a place where generally, you sort of limited based on how big your organization is. In a lot of fields, you think, well, we shipped this many products or we market to this many people, and you can get a lot of that data. But with HR, I would imagine that's tends to be more of is it more of a constraint, more of something that you have to be cognizant about, sort of small data?
Well, I mean, it is small data versus kind of like our manufacturing, where we have lots of tools and so forth. And, really we're just dealing with kind of the employee base, which is around 130,000. So, and there's a lot of different classes and so forth that are out there. So, I mean, from a big data point of view, we don't really have, I wouldn't say this is really qualifies as big data. On it, the big struggle, the big things that we have to think about and stuff are kind of more around privacy and the use of data, and really because we're dealing with people, we also have to think about kind of like disclosures and privacy awareness, and making sure we're giving folks the right disclosures of how we're using the data, and being ethical with that, because I mean, Intel obviously is a very ethical company, so we want to make sure that we're following that, we're living those values, but we also want to be able to make sure that we're evaluating our programs as well. So how do you position that so that you get behind that? And I mean, I guess also gets in the other thing, and another aspect is, you don't want to be using this to penalize. This is really more for discovery. So, and kind of how to make improvements within the organization. So, being able to understand that and be able to communicate that's really important. So, especially with our stakeholders.
Yeah, that's a great point, and certainly highlighted in the HR realm more so than some of the other business functions. Let's say you've found some insight, you've found some that this type of learning or this learning provider or something is useful. We've done the stats, we've been able to measure something, we have good confidence. Can you talk about what it looks like to try to impart some change? Like who are the stakeholders that are going to say, okay, great work, Sarah, let's make this change? Or who are the folks that are, nope, we don't believe any of this. This is different from what our gut tells us, or different from the way things have usually been.
Oh, you totally understand the kind of the dynamics. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that, once you kind of get into being a data scientist or a data professional, you go up to your stakeholders and you find out that you have those that are really, really excited about data. And then there's others who are like, why do I need to do this? Fortunately, the organization I have is really, really, they really do want to have data. They're really data driven. So I'm really fortunate about that. They're really eager about it. The part that you have to keep in mind is that while they may be very data centric, or what I call number centric sometimes, they get overwhelmed if you give them too much complexity on it. So you have to really be careful and have a lot of stakeholder management around what they're willing to absorb or adopt. So, like, for example, I'll just give you kind of like a toy example. Like, folks are very comfortable with level 1, like reaction on their like training products, right? Getting them to think kind of a little bit further down can be a challenge sometimes, of thinking about, because it becomes noisy. Like, how do I know that? Why, they think that they're going to be accountable for kind of the kind of the skill development or the behavioral development. And they're like, hey, that's a little bit out of my scope. And I'm like, yeah, but it helps the company going forward. So trying to get them kind of thinking further down into more from a descriptive, like, hey, how did my product go, to more kind of like, what could be some of the things that are holding the organization back from absorbing this or reinforcing this, getting people to kind of think a little broader about it and being open to that tends to be some of the challenges on it, because if they aren't bought into those metrics, or they don't feel like they can really push that or be accountable to it, it can be a struggle for the adoption. So you have to think about kind of how is it beneficial to them, and positioning those metrics and analysis in that way. So
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, stakeholder management, yes, certainly is key here. And one of the things that you touched that I really like is how much they're able to absorb, and maybe that's how much content information they're able to absorb, or how much really change you're able to absorb. Like, if we do these 11 things, we're going to see these great results with great confidence. Well, we can't change 11 things right now and flip the bear on its head here. We can make some incremental pieces. And it, in my mind, Intel is this high-tech company. I'm sure the folks, the 100,000+ folks that work there, there's a very wide variety of things that folks do. You mentioned there's a lot of data scientists. I would imagine this training applies to the analytics, data science type folks as well. Do they get any special treatment, or are there any other ways? Like, presumably when you're dealing with an analytics manager who's training their data scientists, their analytics professionals, where they've got some background and they can speak more to the technical aspects of the type of work that you're doing. Is that a different conversation?
yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's a different conversation, but in your stakeholder management, you have to build that into that plan, because it's one thing to say, hey, let's go do like some machine learning, and here's some training over here about what a clustering algorithm does, or a regression, or name your favorite analysis. It's one thing to go and tell them to go take a generic training that showcases that, but it's a different different perspective when they have to actually either absorb it as for here's the results and being able to trust it, or giving them data so that they can do their own analysis and so forth. And what I've found is, if you just give them generic training, they're not going to necessarily know how to bring that into their everyday work. They really need, because essentially they then need to figure out how to get that data. They need to know how to structure that data. They need to be able to trust the data. Is it even clean? So if you're going to do training, the most effective way that I've seen it done is really kind of following the 24-hour rule, which is give them training on their data with systems that they can basically go and access at any time to be able to get the answers that they need. So you really need to be thinking about, okay, this group of stakeholders need this data. All right, let's go build that system and give them the data and train them on their data, how to use it, and give them a way of like, okay, this is, system 1.0. Give us feedback on how we can improve this. But at least getting them in so that they can get their hands dirty, be able to use it, start getting trust on it, get some getting some intuition around it, so that they can go further, because it's a huge gap between giving them training of here's kind of an algorithm versus here's the data and the results, and let's talk about how you want to use that. Is this useful? Is this going to help you? And that actually brings the organization much further along, and you're also managing that stakeholder expectations. So
I think that's great. And maybe maybe this isn't eating you up, but I certainly have seen it. You know, AI was a nebulous term for some numbers geeks, 8 months ago, and now it's every leader is exposed and has some access and can even toy around and tinker with things and can see, the abstract level of here's what is specifically large language models, but I think broadly AI can do. Do you see do you see that at Intel at all, or generally over your career? Have you seen, as the hype of AI has fluctuated, how's that changed the appetite for the types of things you do, or the way folks, your stakeholders, ask things from you?
I haven't necessarily seen it per se with the work that I'm doing, but I am seeing conversations of how do we bring AI into our business so that we can move much faster. So, a lot of what AI applications are really around, how do we make the training much more effective? Can we reduce the amount of, the time that we put something together? So could we put a script together and have an AI person, instead of having an actor, have somebody come in, have an AI person or an AI system, deliver that training. How can we kind of get the sentiment analysis with using kind of maybe some already example of a sentiment from folks and so forth on different situations. So those are kind of the things that I'm seeing. It's more kind of a UX. I mean, I heard somebody say that, really today's AI is really around just a UX use cases. So a lot of the applications are really just prepackaged algorithms that have a really sweet UX platform around it. So, and I think that's what we're going to end up seeing going forward. Now, that's going to be on the commercial side, but for folks to actually, implement, I mean, a lot of the competitive advantage for AI is not going to necessarily, it's going to be, part of it is going to be, how can you use these commercially UX designed applications or already, and how can you use that in a unique way? But I think that's only going to be like maybe 40%. But really where the competitive advantage is really trying to figure out what data you have and how can you get more value out of that. And then being able to put that UX application on top of it so that, it makes it easier for stakeholders. Just like what I just explained to you, kind of like you really need to train your folks on their data and with the algorithms that they need to make the decisions. That's kind of the, I think that's the next thing that companies need to be investing in, is really getting the data in a form to them in a UX, with some UX thought around it in order to, speed the value that they're going to get from their data. And I think that's kind of what's missing right now, is that combination of getting the data to the right people and making it user friendly.
Yeah, I think that's a really measured way to look at it, and it's if you can be positive about it, the chat GPTs, it's not putting some false sense of, well, why do we need Sarah to do all this? Why can't we just ask chat GPT to measure our learning and then design learning? But it really is, maybe the brighter side is it's giving sort of this UX experience where, hey, this is a way that is now becoming easier to deliver. If you've done this work, you've gotten the data, you've asked the right questions, this UX can help stakeholders sort of absorb some of the things that you're able to do. So I think that's a great way to look at it. So you've as zoom out a little bit from your role here. You've given us a lot of things with a lot of your background varied. A lot of the work you do now, we've heard it here, focus on stakeholder management and actually helping to solve some problems. Maybe, I know it's hard to distill it down, but do you have any like quick takeaway? Do you have any skills that you think tend to be the most important or maybe the most overlooked for other leaders, the folks listening to the show, leaders in the data space that are trying to implement these changes, make better decisions? What's a key piece of advice that you think you could give?
So I created this framework called the data-driven cultural spiral, which is really thinking about, how do you bring the whole like a team together to be able to implement? And the first thing you have to do is really think about the analytic maturity of the current group. So, the current group is not just your data scientists. Those guys probably are up here on the analytic maturity where, you have to think about who's going to be consuming the analytics, but also the domain owners too, the ones who kind of understand the data or kind of the dynamics or the subject matter experts, along with your leadership. Management leadership and so forth, the sponsorships. They need to come all together and try to figure out kind of where are we on this analytic maturity and try to figure out what are the business problems we need to have and start from as low as, of the lowest group, because you don't really want to go faster than any, your domain experts or your stakeholders, or your management. And really, it's really about identifying that data that you need and then trying to figure out how do you get that data to them in a way that they can consume it and then start measuring success. And from that, you're going to go into this kind of spiral, like this growth spiral, where you're going to start asking more sophisticated questions. You're going to need to get more data. You're going to need to get that data back to the folks. And the faster that organizations can actually do that and measure their success and be able to iterate, they're going to be the ones that are going to have the competitive advantage of analytics. And it's really starting with a small tiger team to figure this out and start getting that business process, get those data processes together and being able to iterate. And that's kind of the typical theme that I've seen really be able to work with organizations. A lot of organizations like, I have to go get my data together. Well, no, you have to start with the business problems first, figure out kind of what data, figure out how to get discipline around that particular data, get that to people so that they can trust the data, they understand it, and then try to figure out, is this making some kind of business impact? And then start, figuring out how do you improve on it. It's an iterative cycle. So that's kind of where I would say, where to start. And, if you're a data leader struggling, because a lot of organizations are struggling with that, that's kind of the framework that I see has worked for me and then for other within the organizations that have been really successful in their data adoption.
That's great. I think it's great. Yeah, I think it is an intuitive framework. And I think the thing probably that's the caution of slow down, go as fast as people are able to absorb and implement is challenging. It feels like there's a lot of pressure and a lot of probably external pressure to go fast, just throw the coolest, newest thing at it quick before something else new comes up. So I think that's a very deliberate and useful framework. Sarah, I do want to ask you one more question. This is sort of we can throw a useful framework to the wind here and just sort of pie in the sky. We've got an easy button to press now, and everybody at Intel is aligned to your vision, and they all are at your speed and they're ready to go. And they say, Sarah, if you let us know where should we point our analytic efforts? We're all on the same page. We've got all of the data. We're ready to spend and allocate whatever team, time, resources, stakeholders you need. Where is the analytic effort going to go?
I would love, I mean, this is kind of like, I geek out, like, what would be my, like, ideal, like my ultimate goal is to really digitalize in an entire corporation, right? So really thinking about kind of from a tops down approach and kind of looking at the business model. And let's just take something like a manufacturing company. Some of the things that you want to, be able to look at it are like from a manufacturing is, okay, I want to be able to determine how many widgets I'm just going to say widgets, how many widgets we're going to need to manufacture, right? So if you actually break down that problem, and go through and so forth, you're going to have to start thinking about kind of what are the components of widgets that you need to. So you need to know how many widgets to make, which means you need to understand kind of what your yield or yield loss is, because you need to be able to make up for that. So you need to be able to predict that. You also need to understand kind of how many maybe be in the distribution. So you don't want to make too much so that you're not having, a burn rate of a product to sell. You also need to look at the consumer demand or the demand from your customers and so forth. So, right there, you already have a formula, right? So how do you go back? You have this formula that may be the number of widgets, which is basically, the number that you can make minus plus the loss that you have versus minus the amount in distribution and so forth. And then start thinking about, okay, when do we need to have an idea of when we need to have those values? Well, you might find out like one of the key components is really hard to source. So you have to give them a 3-month order to be able to get raw materials to be able to make that. So now you have to do a forecast at least 3 months out to be able to get the product that you can get to fulfill. So being able to, go in and try to identify all the dynamics and to be able to model that in a way would be kind of really awesome to be able to go solve that problem.
Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, you listed like 4 or 5 common analytic things, which too often I think stand alone and stand independently. Great. Now we've got this demand forecast. Now let's plug it into our shipment data so that we can balance our inventory. But
right, and you're also dealing with maybe 3 different organizations. So logistics, manufacturing, sales and marketing, and probably even raw materials. So procurement. So yeah, that right there could be a political nightmare just being able to get all that together. But that would be kind of cool just to be able to go, figure out and get that whole team alignment together to figure out how that would happen. And yeah, so that's kind of some of the things that I love doing and trying to figure out kind of, how would you, so if I had all the resources that's the type of project I would love to work on.
Awesome. Well, that is very cool. Sarah, it has been a pleasure talking to you today. If this framework seemed helpful for you, check out Sarah. She's also got Achieve More with Data. Is that right? Do you want to say a quick word about Achieve More with Data?
So I have my own website. I'm going to be putting more content up on there. In fact, if you want to learn a little bit more about the data-driven cultural transformation, I have a blog up there that kind of describes that. I plan on putting more and more up there over the next, couple months and so forth on that. So yeah, so check me out on achievemorewithdata.com.
Okay, perfect. And we will link to that in today's show notes. So wherever you're listening or watching this, you can check out the notes. You can click there for Achieve More with Data. learn more about Sarah. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you, Evan, for the opportunity, and thank you, everyone, for listening.